This is a kick your can the can down the road approach. This is so they kick it down the road. But if it's not sustainable, and you keep kicking it down the road, you're going to eventually meet the day of reckoning when the whole thing explodes. Yeah, no, it's a bad thing. Number one, the debt always has to be paid off. Now, a lot of people say, "Well, we owe it to ourselves." So they go through a lot of sophistry, arguing that, well, we owe it to ourselves, and 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 we really never have to pay it off. Well, you always have to pay it off, and the interest, by the way, is something that's paid by taxpayers. They get nothing for it. Taxes are collected. The money goes to pay bondholders who are holding the bonds, and nothing is produced. I mean, it's just money down the rat hole. So, my friend Art Laffer and I, obviously, if that's what Art said, we disagree. I mean, the debt is a big problem, and even the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan kind of technocratic outfit, the Congressional Budget Office says it's not sustainable. We can't keep going like this. I agree. It isn't sustainable. And if something isn't sustainable, it will stop. And and how will we stop it? Well, right now, the way the thing is set up, there are only three ways to stop the deficit and control a debt level. And one would be to reduce and control government spending. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is to increase taxes. That would close the deficit. And there are two ways to tax. One is direct taxes that you pay to the IRS. The other is indirect taxes, the inflation tax. So the three things: you want to stop the growth in the deficit that is not sustainable. And you do that by either cutting government spending down and reining it in, increasing direct taxes, or increasing the inflation tax. Entitlements, as that word implies, a synonym would be rights, that you have the right to. The only right that we have in the Constitution actually is the right to trial by jury. That's the only thing that actually is in the Constitution. So all of this is made up. These entitlements or rights that, in principle, in principle, I'm a skeptic about all these so-called rights that you can invent just out of thin air. Now, does Hanke have the right to receive something? And if I have the right to receive it, where do we get the money? Do we get it from Sachs? Through the political system, do I have the right to put a gun at your head and rob you just because I have the right, because some law has been passed to receive $25,000 to buy a home or whatever it happens to be? So that's the problem. These things are really theft, because the money has to come from somebody, and they aren't voluntarily coughing up the money. When if all of a sudden Hanke has the right to something, and that has to be paid for by Sachs, and Sachs doesn't agree to this, that's like somebody coming in with a gun and saying, "Open your wallet, Sachs, and you give me your money." That's the entitlement mentality, that people have rights somehow for whatever reason. They have the right to this and the right to that and the right to that. as I say, if you really go back and are hardcore about it and look at the Constitution, there is one right in the Constitution that Americans have, and that is they have the right to a trial by jury. Well, this is a real problem because, for example, uh, Social Security is kind of a mixed bag because let's say if I was to draw Social Security, well, some of what I get I've actually paid in a long time ago, so I have contributed to it, but to the extent that I'd be receiving payments that weren't financed by me, they'd have to be financed by somebody else, and that's an entitlement. So generically, even though it's kind of a mixed thing, the Social Security, it's considered as an entitlement. Now, if you get it, and there's a big issue about solvency of this thing, because the only way you really can keep the system going, given the way it works, is you got to have more and more young people actually financing old timers. Like money that we receive would have to be forked up by younger people who are actually working in the labor market. So if you touch that, there's an explosion. There was a movement with George W. Bush to put in private Social Security, and it created a firestorm. And that proposal was dropped right away. So the only way you can do that, by the way, which would be a great idea to have private Social Security, is to basically say those who are already in the system are are going to stay in the system. We're not going to take anything away from you. And but the new ones, you pull up the drawbridge and say there are going to be no new entrants in this thing, and we're gonna gradually phase it out. So the transition is the problem with getting a transition away from these entitlements to some other more private approach is a real problem. It's a little bit like, the guy who went down Niagara Falls in a barrel. They announced he was going to go down, and of course they had all the press was there, and the guy goes down, and God, he made it over. He went over the falls and came out at the end, and of course the press was there to interview him, and they said, "Well, how was it?" And he said, "Well, above the falls, it was pretty calm, and 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 it was also not too bad after I got over the falls." But he said the transition was a bitch, and that is the problem. You're transitioning from an entitlement system to a non-entitlement system, which ultimately is going to have to occur because even the Congressional Budget Office is telling us this is not sustainable. And if something is not sustainable, it has to stop. And working out how that transition would work, and what the new alternative would look like is a political can of is a not a can of worm. It's not only a can of worms; it's a hot potato. This is a kick your can the can down the road approach. This is so they kick it down the road, kick it down the road. But if it's not sustainable, and you keep kicking it down the road, you're going to eventually meet the day of reckoning when the whole thing explodes. No, they can't make changes that would prevent a recession because that's already baked in the cake. That is because of money supply contraction that occurred starting in roughly the summer of 2022. So that thing is baked in the cake. And the only question is, what stupidity might they do in reaction to the recession that's caused by changes in the money supply a long time ago? If a recession hits, the danger is that they'll do some stupidity, whether you have a recession or not a recession. Again, it's this giveaway. it's a giveaway society, right society. Everybody supposedly has the right to this, the right to that, an entitlement here, an entitlement there. Those are just giveaways, and people have to get it in their head. The giveaway comes out of somebody's pocket, and the pocket it comes out of is not necessarily somebody who would voluntarily give that $25,000 to somebody to buy a new home. So that means it's in effect theft. The government is, you know, it's basically like a street thug. It's like armed robbery. It's going to be a game that ends badly. That's in my judgment. Now, if you look at like New York City, for example, the annual cost of financing the facilities for the immigrants, and this is off the top of my head, so it's a rough figure, but it's like $150,000 per immigrant per year. And the average income in the United States is only about 75,000. So it's costing a lot of money, and again, it's a holdup theory. They're requiring some taxpayers. Somebody has to pay for it. It's pretty pricey. It's pretty expensive. So so that's the the kind of near term bottom line is it's costing more per illegal immigrant than the average per capita income in the United States, like double. It's a lot of money. Yeah, that number one, I can't imagine that would be ruled as being something that would be constitutional. So I I question kind of the legal uh, validity of that, but that's a practical thing. Just as a matter of principle, it's a terrible idea. And if you look at all the high tax states like California, Maryland, New York, you name it, people are moving out. And this gets into supply side economics. Of course, you know I'm I might be a monetarist, but I'm also a supply sider. Economics is all about incentives, and you know that was the main thrust of Reaganomics, where I was one of Reagan's advisors at the Council of Economic Advisors, and it was, you know, this this kind of stuff would go in the trash pretty fast back in those days. I mean, can you imagine taxing someone because they wanted to move out of your jurisdiction? I don't think that would stand up in court. By the way, the one good thing, supply side and property tax, that actually happened in 1978 in California was Proposition 13, which put a cap on property taxes. And most people don't realize at that time San Francisco was in the tank. It was going down the tubes because of property taxes. As soon as Prop 13 came in, within 3 years, San Francisco is booming. They also put a tax cap, Prop 2.5 in Massachusetts a few years later, and exactly the same thing happened. Most people think Boston, you know, has always been a booming, innovative place. No, it was tanking, just like San Francisco. Everybody thinks, oh, San Francisco, great place, booming all the time. No, it was tanking. And Boston was the same thing. It was tanking. They put in Prop 2.5 and boom, up, and they've never looked back. So incentive economics is all about incentives, and if you want to put in negative incentives, you're going to get negative results. What if actually this became law and was legal, passed muster from a legal point of view, which I don't think it would, but at any rate, you'd have the United States in which you were taxing people to move around within the United States. One of the great things about the United States, number one, it's a huge market, so that gives it geographic firepower is tremendous. But the main thing is the fluidity, the flexibility, the movement in the economy, not only to move geographically around the United States, but the churn, what they call the churn. And and if you look at the people who are in an income bracket, they don't stay in that income bracket very long. The churn, if you're down at the bottom of the barrel, chances are within 10 or 20 years you're going to be moving up a lot. And if you're up on the top end, the churn works the same way. There's a pretty good chance you'll be going down. So there's a lot of movement in the income distribution in the United States, as well as geographic movement of people moving around in the United States. And that dynamism is one thing that has put the United States where it is. It's been good, not bad. Balance the budget, and don't let the government grow any more rapidly than the growth in the economy. So that way we would know that the the cancer of the government expanding and taking over more and more of the economy, that would stop.